following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back. When the Jints and them bums played in New York, I've got the two mavens with me to talk about it, Mr. Noel Hynd and Mr. Alan Blumkin. Welcome, gentlemen. Start with you, Alan. How are you?
So. I'm still having back problems, but that's neither here nor there. Hopefully they'll resolve in the next week or two.
Okay. Future doctor appointment or anything?
Yeah.
Okay. Keep us posted. Noel Hynd,
yes.
Author, Renaissance man, raconteur. How are you, sir?
I'm good after that introduction. That kind of, I'm feeling like I'm 2 inches taller, even though I'm sitting down after a nice lead in like that.
I was going for three, but shoot for the shoot for the moon, go for the stars.
Yeah, no, I bought the last game Dodger book last week. I haven't started it yet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoy it. A lot of the people who are reading it really know, the Dodgers franchise and the history very well. So I'm hoping it lives up to the reviews that it's gotten on Amazon, which have been really quite good. So thank you, and we'll speak in the future about it.
Yeah, well, I grew up during the 50s, so I know all that stuff.
Well, you don't think I missed the 50s now, do you?
No, the history of the Dodgers.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I was born and raised in the 50s, but I didn't quite grow up.
Well, we know that.
Yeah.
That's self-evident.
Anybody has a long life passion for this has been around the block a few times.
Oh, yeah. Maybe Noel doesn't know this, but Alan, speaking of growing up in the 50s and worshiping baseball, Alan knows every card in the 1952 top set by number, who they were, who the player was. Am I correct, Alan?
Yes.
You still have that in your head?
Oh, yeah, because I do it every so often to put myself to sleep. And I think of various, things, what World Series they were in, all that sort of stuff.
Can I quiz
you? Not too many of them left. We've been losing a lot of them this year, so I think there's only about 15 that are still alive.
Yeah, we lost somebody who was 98 years old yesterday.
Well, Wally Westlake.
Oh, yeah. Played for the Phillies, I believe.
Yeah, at the end. He came up with the Pirates, went to the Cardinals, the Reds and the Indians, and I think either Baltimore and the Phillies. And he was the last surviving member of the 1954 Indians.
Is that right?
Yeah, because Don Marcy and Hal Narragon went this year also, within the last several months.
Well, this is going to be a good segue because the topic I chose for this morning is players that crossed the line after Jackie for those three teams in New York in the 50s, the Giants, the Dodgers, and the Yankees. And you mentioned that Wally Westlake was the last surviving member
of the 1954 Indians.
1954 Indians. Wow. Willie Mays is the last surviving member of the 51 Giants. And of course, he survives the 54 Giants.
Yeah, he had Antonelli, I think, are the only two left from that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Antonelli is 89.
Antonelli. There's a story we'll talk about someday, how the tough transition when the Giants left New York, Antonelli came out west with him. And he was one of those guys not accepted in San Francisco. Didn't like San Francisco. They didn't like him. But for another day, we're going to talk today, like I say, about the players who crossed the line after Jackie. And on those three teams specifically, Alan knows them in order. Let's talk about them in order of their coming to the big leagues.
Okay, the Dodgers, I believe, were a pitcher named Dan Bankhead, and then Campanella, and then Gilliam. I'm sorry, Black, and then Gilliam. And the Giants, it was Henry Thompson, Monty Irvin, and Willie Mays. And the Yankees, of course, was Elston Howard.
Not until 1955.
And they got rid of Vic Power. Vic Power came up through their system, and they got rid of him to the then Philadelphia A's because George Weiss thought he was too flamboyant, among other things.
Yeah,
among the other things, Vic Power was dating white women at the time in the 1950s, and George Weiss, I believe, wanted no part of that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Power was terrifically talented. This guy.
Oh, absolutely.
Great first baseman. Even played a little second base with the Kansas City A's at one time or another. He was slicker than hell around first base and a pretty good hitter. 1959, the Cleveland Indians put on that great pennant race against the White Sox and the Yankees with one of the all-time best teams of the 50s, featuring Vic Power, among others, Minnie Minoso, Jimmy Pearsall,
Rocky Colavito.
Yes, Rocky Colavito.
That was his last year before Lane shipped him to Detroit on the first day of right before the 1960 season.
Good player.
Yeah.
Noel, pick another player on the Dodgers that came up that you'd like to elaborate on their lives a little bit.
On the Dodgers or the Giants?
On the Dodgers first.
Let me think. Elaborating on the Dodgers, well, I guess Newcomb, actually, because I always used to root against him.
Oh, I forgot Newcomb. I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah. The Newcomb, I guess, wasn't he Rookie of the Year around 49? Yeah. Newcomb was a tough guy, a tough competitor. I mostly saw him at the time through the eyes of a child. I was born in 1947. And Newcomb would torture my two favorite teams, which were the Cardinals and the Giants. And I used to dread seeing that guy pitching against one of the teams I like. I could remember very well 1956, I guess it was, when he was 27-7. And the only thing that you couldn't understand about that season was how he managed to lose 7 games. He just seemed to be overpowering. I think the games that he lost were usually like 3-2, 2-1. Often he was matched up against someone like Warren Spahn or even Antonelli. I think Newcomb's only losing record, the only team he had a losing record against in that era was the Milwaukee Braves. And, of course, most pitchers did have a losing record against the Milwaukee Braves because you were going up against Aaron, Adcock, Matthews, and some very good pitchers, including Spahn. So there's my spiel on Newcomb.
All right. Tell us a little bit, Alan, about Dan Bankhead.
He came out of
the
Negro Leagues, and he wasn't really successful as a pitcher, but he managed to hang around long enough to get a 1951 Bowman card, which is when I first knew about him. And he came from a baseball-playing family. I think a couple of his brothers also played in the Negro Leagues. But he really couldn't make the adjustment and really wasn't successful. So his career was not anywhere Newcomb's. And one of the things about Newcomb is that once he came to the Dodgers, they stopped throwing at Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella, the other teams.
Right.
Because Newcomb would knock them down.
Just had some retaliation.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing that really hurt Newcomb's career was after 1951, they took him into the Army for 2 years. And he was very bitter about that because other pitchers of his age, he was, I believe, 25 at the time, didn't get called up, specifically Robin Roberts. So he was very, very bitter about that. And he came out for 1954, had a very bad year. He was 9-8. And I think that I did a whole project on players who lost time to the service back then. And I concluded that Newcomb was the player that was most affected by having to go into the Army during that period.
Why was he? I'm sorry. Why was Newcomb called?
Okay, he lost at least. He was missed out on 2 pennant winners, and lost conservatively lost 30 wins.
Yeah.
Okay, and then he had a bad year when he came out, and then he had the 2 big years of 20 and 5 and 27 and 7, as you mentioned. But after that season, he gave up. He always didn't have a very good World Series record, and Yogi Berra took him downtown 3 times, including 2 in the last game. And Newcomb resumed drinking after that series, which really
why was he drafted at such an old age?
Who knows? Somebody needed to fill a quota somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, it almost.
Look, I went through the draft of 1968, 1967, and I was originally classified 1Y, which is only an emergency, and then they lowered the bar, and all of a sudden I was 1A, and I appealed it, and I wound up enlisting in the reserves with a draft notice in my pocket, and I told them, if you don't let me stay in the reserves, you can send my file to Washington, and they let me stay in the reserves for 6 years. But that, I had to make an appearance before the draft board once, and all I saw was the only thing they regarded me as just another body to fill a quota.
Oh, yeah.
This was during the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
This was before the lottery. So,
you asked
and I was 25 at the time.
Why Newcomb was called up, why Robin Roberts wasn't. It's all the local draft boards that these guys were under that made the decisions.
Yeah, they transferred Willie Mays. Willie Mays got the transfer from Alabama to New York, and all that did was buy him 2 months.
Ah, okay. So there have always been inequities in everything. Baseball, politics, the world. It's unfair. Never was
unfair. Even when they had the lottery, it was the draft boards were inconsistent because you could be. I was in the first lottery in December of '69. I got lucky. I got a 312. However, as the year progressed, it was quite clear that some draft boards were filling their quotas only by going up to like 120, 130, and other people were going all the way up to 240. So there you go. It was a matter of what boards had how many working class kids who didn't have deferments.
Right.
It's like during World War II, the St. Louis area didn't have a big quota, and most of the Cardinals and some of the Browns played through the war years.
Mm-hmm. Notably Musial, for example.
Yeah, he put 1 year in.
Right, but I think
1945.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk about Ellie Howard, would you, Alan?
Okay, Ellie Howard was brought up in
Yankees.
1955. He had played his final minor league year at Toronto instead of Denver, where the Kansas City Blues had moved to after the major leagues put the A's in Kansas City. They had an agreement with Toronto, and he had 330 there, and I think may have been the International League MVP. And he
Correct.
was the type that the Yankees wanted. He was very, very quiet. Went out and did his job. There was no controversy about him. And the Yankees were under a lot of political pressure to come up with a black ball player. And so they brought in Ollie Howard, and he basically played the outfield for his first few years because Yogi Berra was behind the plate, and he contributed, quite a bit to their run from 55 through 58, and again the later run from 60 to 64. 63, he was named the American League Most Valuable Player. And he gradually became the regular catcher as Yogi Berra started to age, and they started to play Yogi in left field and Elson Howard catcher. And he fit the Yankee mold. And the players were very protective of him for the most part. So if he met the criteria that George Weiss, the general manager, established, the only other black player I believe that they had in the 50s was Suitcase Simpson, who they had gotten from Kansas City in the Billy Martin trade. And Stengel didn't play Simpson very often because he didn't like him. And the next year he was sent back to, 1958, he was sent back to the A's.
Right. Another versatile player.
When
did Hector Lopez come up? Was that
he came up in 1955. He was the second Panamanian because there was a pitcher in the Braves named Humberto Robinson that beat him out by a few days. The Yankees got Hector Lopez in May of 1959 with Ralph Terry, and they traded Jerry Lumpy and Johnny Cucks and Tom Sullivan, both of whom had bad arms at that point. Kansas City was a dumping ground for these guys.
Yeah.
Noel, if you would, your memories of Hank Thompson with a P.
Well, Hank Thompson, some of my memories are a part of my research memories, having written a book on the Giants. But I can remember Hank Thompson as a player, and for some reason I always kind of liked him. There was something, I don't know, maybe he came across as a little surly sometimes. Maybe that's what I admired. He must have been a tough character, though. Hank Thompson, before his baseball career, was in the Battle of the Bulge in Germany. He was a machine gunner. If you do the math, Hank Thompson was born in 1925. The Battle of the Bulge was in December of 44 and went into 1945. So this guy was 20 years old and a machine gunner in World War II. He was a sergeant. I mean, how do you come out of an experience like that alive without being a tough ass, really? Later on, he was signed by the Browns. He was, I believe, the first black player with the St. Louis Browns. Later on, he became one of the first black players, along with Monty Irvin, to be in the lineup for the New York Giants. So not only did Thompson integrate two different teams personally, but he was the first black player to play for two teams in the two different leagues. Later on, he was a great contributor to the 1951 team, and I believe in the World Series, I'm operating from memory now, DeRocher put out an outfield of Monty Irvin, Willie Mays, and Hank Thompson, and it was the first all-black outfield, correct me if I'm wrong on this,
correct,
to play,
you are. No, you are 100% correct.
Don Mueller broke his ankle right before the Bobby Thompson home run.
Right, exactly.
So he was out of the series, and that's why Hank Thompson was playing right field. I mean, he went into a slump during that season, and DeRocha benched him for a while. That's what they put Bobby Thompson at third base.
Okay,
right.
I'm going to show off Al Blumkin's trivia knowledge. I happen to know the answer to this one. Who came in to run for Mueller when he broke
The
his
immortal
ankle?
Clint Hartung.
Yes.
Who when he came up to the major leagues, Dick Young, because he was such a terrific player when he was in the Army, that Dick Young said that's just they send him right to the Hall of Fame without having to play in the major leagues.
Yeah.
Uh,
That was Dick Young in a good mood.
yeah.
Yes. Would you guys talk about Campy in any way you want to discuss him?
Alan, you can go first.
Okay, thank you. No, Roy Campanella was signed in 1946. He played 1947. He and Newcomb combined to play at Nashua, New Hampshire, which was a Class B league at the time. And Campanella had started in the Negro Leagues with the Baltimore Elite Giants at age 15. So he was in the Negro Leagues for over approximately 10 years before he was tapped by Branch Rickey to come along. Now, when 1948 occurred, a Dodger catcher, a regular catcher, Bruce Edwards, came down with a bad arm. And DeRocha started screaming for Campanella. And that was one of the final things that led to a break between DeRocha and Rickey, because Rickey used Campanella to open break the color line in the AAA American Association. And he was there for half a year before he finally got called up to the Dodgers, and he proved to be a tremendous defensive catcher. And he couldn't make the playoffs of 1951 because of an injured leg, and they had to use Rube Walker, and he had 3 big years in 1951, 1953, and 1955, where he won the MVP both times, all 3 times, and he had 2 very bad years in 1954 and 1956 due to injuries. And, he had a mediocre year at the age of 35 in 1957, and then, of course, came the car accident in 1958, which paralyzed him for the rest of his life. But basically, what his success did, it set off a Campanella-Berra debate, which really didn't end until the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles.
Okay, now can you be objective about that? You're a big Yogi fan.
Yeah, well,
who was the better of the two?
See, Yogi was steadier. Bill James did a peak and career breakdown on certain things, like he had Mickey Mantle as a peak center fielder, Willie Mays' career. Yogi had a better career. Campanella's probably as good or better than him when he was peaked.
Okay. Good one. Good.
Let me just throw a question at Alan. Where would you put Campanella among the all-time catchers? Obviously, he'd be in the discussion as one of the greatest ever.
Yeah, I think I would probably put him in the top 10. Okay. But not because his peaks and valleys were very, very strong. So my all-time favorite is Yogi. You got Yogi, Bench, Cochran and Dickey from that era.
Yeah.
Okay, and a couple of others that I think the best one and currently over has had a long career is Yadier Molina on the Cardinals. You probably put in Fisk and a couple of others that not coming to me right now. And I'll tell you,
Munson might be one of the greatest.
Yeah, well, Munson, if he lasted longer. I'll tell you who was also very good and hardly ever gets credit because his batting average was very low was Wes Westrom.
Yeah, the average was low.
Yeah, he walked an awful lot, which means batting eighth most of the time. He would walk and the pitcher would come up, so the pitcher wouldn't be leading off the next inning.
Right.
So Harry Cheedy and Chris Cannizzaro are not on your list?
No, none of those Met guys. First few years.
Well, Cheedy's on mine because, as you guys know, traded for himself.
Yes, exactly.
So they had 7 catches in 1962, and my favorite was Choo Choo Coleman, who in 1963 played in over 100 games and drove in 9 runs.
Well, I remember the Ralph Kiner interviews with Choo Choo Coleman. They were priceless.
Yeah.
Choo Choo was not the most articulate of guys, and Ralph Kiner wasn't necessarily a great interviewer, but they got nothing out of each other. Choo Choo would say, or Ralph Kiner would say, "What's your wife's name?" Mrs. Coleman.
And what does she like? Me.
What does she like? She likes me.
Yeah.
I guess he read Hemingway. I don't know.
Yes. All right, guys. This has been, as usual, a terrific show.
Let's go into Monty Irvin a little bit.
Oh, really? Before we close?
Yeah.
The Stan Musial of the Giants. That's what how I think of him. All class.
Yeah. If you're throwing it to me, I just throw in a personal thing about Monty Irvin. I went to a private school, a boarding school in Connecticut, and they would have a athletic banquet every year. And I was there for 2 years. I left. I went to a school in Switzerland that's a story in itself. And I came back and discovered that this is in the mid-'60s. They always had a famous speaker at the athletic banquet. They had Otto Graham one year. The year I was away, they had Monty Irvin. To this day, I'm sorry that I missed Monty Irvin. I would have been up there with a baseball. A good man, classy guy. I do not remember him as a player because he was just before my time, and I believe he went to the Cubs around 1955 or retired around 1955.
Yeah, he played 1 year there.
Yeah. Was it 55? I think.
Yeah, 55 was his last year with the Giants.
Oh, okay. So he was with the Cubs
56. I believe 56. He played with the. Was the year he played with the Cubs.
Yeah.
As did Charlie Silvera, whose last year with the Yankees was 55. He was traded.
56.
Oh, maybe, okay. Maybe
yeah.
He wasn't. Oh, okay. Never mind. But Charlie Silvera passed away this past week.
Yeah. Let me say a few words about Monty Irvin.
Go ahead.
He was a Negro League star who served in World War II. He formed a double play combination with Larry Doby. And the Eagles, Newark Eagles, Monty played shortstop, and Larry Doby played second base. And when he came to the Giants, they put him at first base because Whitey Lockman was playing the outfield, and Monty Irvin hated. He had over 500 in Trenton, which I think was a Class B league at the time. They brought him up early in 1950, and he hated playing first base. So in 1951, fairly early in the season, he switched Monty Irvin to left field and brought Whitey Lockman in to play first base. And that worked out. Monty Irvin led the National League in the runs batted in, and possibly could have gotten the MVP in 1951. And he had a very big series against the Yankees. He stole home. I think he got 11 hits in the 6 games. And then in spring training of 1952, he broke his leg sliding into a base in an exhibition game. And he missed 2/3 of the season. And I think the 1952 team was the best job that DeRocha did, because he was out without Irvin for 2/3 of the season, and Mays went into the Army. And then we finished 4.5 games out. And Irvin came back, had a good year in 1953, but was slowing down in 1954 at age 35. And would start at left field in the World Series, but eventually in the games he would be replaced by Dusty Rhodes, who had a series that was unbelievable. And then he was sold to the Cubs. I spent about 15 minutes one-on-one with him, with Monty Irvin, at the Sabre Convention in 2000 in West Palm Beach, Florida. Very, very nice man.
What a lot of people forget about him, and you alluded to it, is he never got to the major leagues until he was 30 years old.
Yeah.
And he had also played in the Mexican League in the early 1940s and actually won the Triple Crown in the Mexican League, I think in 1942, and then went into the armed forces and, like Hank Thompson, fought in combat in Europe, in segregated units, and really was quite a guy. Really was.
It's my understanding, and you guys maybe can correct me, that the first person that Branch Rickey, Mr. Rickey, thought of was not Jackie Robinson. It was Monty Irvin to break the color line.
I have heard that.
Yeah, I think he felt that Irvin was too old. He was already 30 at 31 at that point. No, I'm sorry. He was older than a little bit older than Jackie Robinson. Another two I want to mention before we close are Joe Black, who came up and basically saved the Dodgers season in 1952, and then after that season, which he was 15-4, Dressen insisted that he learn a new pitch. I've read this in several books. Okay, and he couldn't learn the pitch, and he lost his rhythm and never recovered it after that. So Dressen ruined him as an effective pitcher after that rookie year. And the other one I want to mention is Jim Gilliam, who replaced Jackie Robinson at second base. I mean, I was 10 when this happened, and nobody could believe it. But they made room for him when they sold Andy Pafko to the Milwaukee Braves. After Pafko was playing left field in 1952, he was at the Dodgers a year and a half. He put Gilliam at second base, and initially put Jackie Robinson at third, but Jackie Robinson was not a good third baseman, and they brought Billy Cox back, so they put Jackie Robinson out in left field.
Didn't Don Hoke play third base for them around that?
Sparingly. After they got rid of Cox, who was 35 or 36 at the time, they sold him and Preacher Road to the Orioles. They brought in Ransom Jackson in '56 from the Cubs, and Hoke was traded to the Cubs that year, but in '55 he played fairly often.
Hoke was a case. He was a pretty good infielder. Played with the Cubs, played with the Reds a little bit.
The Pirates. He was one of the Pirate regulars in 1960 that propelled them for the pennant. He was second in the MVP voting that year. He also dropped dead of a heart attack at the age of 41, chasing somebody who had robbed his son or son-in-law.
Wow.
Now, he thought he was going to get the managerial job at Pittsburgh after, and they hired Danny Murtaugh again. I think this was 1969. But Gilliam lasted quite a long time with the Dodgers. He was a switch hitter. He scored a lot of runs, was a great hit and run man, and he has the only Dodger number that's been retired that was not a member of the Hall of Fame.
Well, and he played at a time that we're talking about that featured the best two utility infielders. They weren't utility infielders. They were regulars. But Gilliam and Gil McDougall with the Yankees, played in 2 or 3 different positions when they won championships. I know McDougall played short, third, and second on primarily as regulars.
Yeah,
championship teams.
He took over third base from Billy Johnson and Bobby Brown. He took over shortstop for Rizzuto, and he went to second base when Billy Martin went into the service, and Jerry Coleman really couldn't cut it anymore. Gilliam became a coach with the Dodgers. Gilliam had several years in the Negro Leagues. And he was played in the East-West All-Star game a few times. And he eventually wound up at third base when they moved to L.A., and he was a coach for them before he died suddenly in 1970 during the 1978 World Series.
Yeah, they dedicated that series to.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, he's the only non-Hall of Famer for the Dodgers that has number retired.
Number 19.
Yeah.
Junior Gilliam. Thanks, guys. Terrific show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything you want to close with, Noel?
Not really. Look forward to the next show, and always fun to speak with both of you.
Thank you. Same here.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I'll just say that Ellie Howard, who we talked about, kind of died of a broken heart when he never became manager of the Yankees.
Yeah, that's probably true. He was only 50, like 51 or 2 when he passed.
What a privilege it is to live, and it isn't a guarantee. Thank you guys for reaching our ripe old age with me.
Yeah, he was one of he and Yogi Berra were responsible for breaking up the dugout fight between Billy Martin and Reggie Jackson.
Yes. And if you look at the pictures, he was a big, hulking guy.
Yeah.
There was no business, nothing was a game to him. It was all serious. Ellie Howard. All right, guys, we'll do it again next week when the Bums and the Jints, in no particular order, played in New York along with the Yankees. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
for
Ralph.
listening, everybody. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Noel Hynd and Alan Blumkin, Mavens. Adios.
Bye-bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.